Welcome to Spiritual Wisdom Weekly from the Greater Orlando Center for Spiritual Living. Each week, we share practical spiritual insights designed to support your growth, helping you live with more clarity, compassion, and intention. Wherever you're listening from, we're glad you're here. Let's begin.
And now, our message, Reverend Cindy Shalom, Rolling Away the Stone.
Morning. Let's see if yeah, that's on. Is that about right? Okay. Hi, everybody. It's good to be back. You know, statistics say that this is the most well-attended church service of the year for all traditional or U.S. churches, wherever these surveys come from. Christmas is actually only second, and Mother's Day is third. Now, the reason I looked that up is that as we were off on our travels and I started thinking about what I wanted to talk about today, two different little ideas popped into my mind, two memories from times gone by. The first was an episode of The Vicar of Dibley. Does anybody else watch this show? Oh my goodness. So this is a British comedy. The lead person in it is a comedian, so that tells you a lot about the show right there. She is the first woman vicar in a small rural area of England. There's one episode that is probably my favorite. I watch it every year, almost every year. And it's called The Christmas Lunch Incident. And there's a whole lot of other things that are the reason I watch. But it's made clear that this is her second Christmas talk to do. And we're at the parish council president's home. I think it's Christmas Eve. And he asks her if she is ready, if she's got her talk all prepared. And his name is David, she's Geraldine. Geraldine goes, well, I haven't thought about it much. And David is appalled. You gotta be kidding me. This is the biggest talk of the year. This is the one chance you've got to get everybody in. This is like making the keynote address at our big political convention. He, of course, is a politician. And he goes on to point out to her that, you know, if she delivers another stinker, then she's lost him to Satan for a whole nother year. And Geraldine reacts. And I thought, well, you know that I'm not too worried about the Satan part of that. However, there does imply a little bit of pressure on the Easter talk, right? Because it's even bigger than that Christmas talk. The other thing that I remembered was a talk that I heard from Rocco Errico. Now, if that name sounds familiar, he writes in our Science of Mind magazine about, I think it's every other month now, an article called The Language of Jesus. And he studies all the way back to the original Aramaic writings, and he has given a lot of academic weight and insight into some of those biblical verses that we may have heard in our youth that didn't actually tell us their original meaning and intent behind them. So I like him a lot. But in this particular talk, one of the things he said that really stuck with me is that traditional Christianity tends to focus a lot on the birth and the death of Jesus and not much on what he taught in between. Well, here in Science of Mind, we are very much focused on this example that Jesus set, and Jesus, along with many other spiritually advanced beings, in their lives, in their teachings, and their writings. And so we're not focused on the tombstone dates, we're focused on that dash in between, all the stuff that happens. And though we grew out of Christian roots, one thing that sets us new thought folk apart is that we see Jesus as an example of living with spiritual awareness. An example of living with spiritual awareness rather than an exception to the spiritual laws that the rest of us have to live with. Now that's a big distinction between New Thought and the more traditional way to believe. We believe that Jesus understood himself to be created by and of that which created everything. That he understood that the power of that one creative force was operating through him as him at all times. And from that viewpoint, if you view this as someone who actually understood the workings of the universe, understood its own divinity, then the things that have come to be known as miracles are really just the result of this ability to let God flow through him without restraint. The shift that we make is from seeing a miraculous, once so far in all of time, anomaly, to recognizing the thing that is exceptional in the story of Jesus is his complete acceptance of his divine creation. And all the physical, that he is this physical form of God appearing and in action here on earth. I've been thinking about the fact that Jesus taught in parables. He liked to teach through them. That's how he conveyed some of the most core spiritual principles that he wanted people to grasp and hang on to. And some things like we need to love ourselves and our neighbor. There's good to be expected. Gifts are being given. Living is abundant. These are these core principles he taught through the use of parables. He told stories about everyday people in everyday circumstances to illustrate these important ideas. And I got to thinking that what really happened is he lived his whole life as a parable of sorts. He was an everyday guy, doing everyday kinds of things, right? Carpentry, fishing. He traveled on foot. He went to temple. An everyday guy doing everyday sort of things. And the events that we walk through then during this Easter period of time is really kind of the big finale parable, the one that capped off the whole life. And it includes being reviled and betrayed, abandoned, broken, ultimately killed in a very physical and public way. Now, that's a pretty solid list of things that all of us are probably a little worried and fearful about in life. So how do you teach a really memorable lesson that covers all of those things and says this can all be overcome? No matter how bad it looks in your life, I'm having one of the worst times ever, and this gets overcome. How do you teach that lesson and make it stick through the ages? I'd say he came up with a pretty good plan because we are still talking about it, right? It's 2026. It's been a long time. But I do think that some of the key things, some of the key points that this parable was all about have been obscured over time. Somehow all the big noise is being made about dying for our sins, being sacrificed on our behalf. I mean, no wonder guilt plays a role in so many different religions. Died for me. Oh. It also became about worshiping Jesus himself, which he very specifically asked us not to do. One thing I think, though, that we got right out of this whole parable was the idea that the resurrection itself is something to be celebrated. And I'm going to divert a little here because there are some really interesting things that have become part of our tradition for celebrating this holiday. And then I'm going to get back to what I think people are really supposed to get from the parable. A lot of what we now identify as Easter traditions that we seem to think came all the way down from the first one of the time that we ever thought about the death of Jesus are actually more about spring itself. They're actually not tied directly to biblical events. Most scholar historians do agree that there was a person named Jesus that was crucified in the spring. And in fact, they've actually come up with a date. They've got two dates, but the one that's got the most support is April 3rd, Friday, April 3rd of 33 for the crucifixion. And that's kind of interesting because this year Good Friday was on April 3rd. So we're right on line. In many parts of the world, the name Easter isn't used for this time. We Anglo-Saxons use Easter and Germans use Ostern, which seem to come from a similar root, which had been settled at one point as Old English and now is up for grabs again as meaning something else. You can go down rabbit holes, that goes with Easter, go down rabbit holes studying some of this. I'm not going to tell you all of that. But many of the countries that do celebrate this time of year use their term for Passover. So most of the terms for this that we call Easter have to do with Passover. And it is the records from the Jewish community and Passover that has allowed them to try to home in on these dates. Now, eggs have been associated from pretty early on with this, and including doing them in colors. There's some places that do all red for certain reasons. There's some that do the multicolors. But they have represented new birth. But I also read that you're not allowed to eat eggs during Holy Week. So come Sunday, when that's over with, they're a nice gift to get. But they are delivered by a variety of animals across the world, a large variety, and even bells. In France, apparently the church bells are not rung during Holy Week, and the children are told that the bells flew off to the Vatican for, I guess, a conference of bells or whatever, and then they come back on Easter, and that's who's dropping the eggs. The bells are flying over town dropping eggs. In Australia, they decided rabbits are actually considered a pest over there, so they didn't want everybody to be overly in love with rabbits. So they have surpassed it with the bilby. Now, I actually saw a picture before I read about this, and I thought, who has an Easter rat? It's not a rat. It's a very small marsupial, but it looks very rat-like in pictures. And it's a native endangered species. So they decided, let's replace the rabbit with a bilby, and then we will have chocolate bilbies, and we'll have them share the proceeds of that for the conservation of the bilby. So in Australia, the bilby brings the eggs. In France, they also, with eggs, there's one town that has it's 4 meters, which is about 13-foot skillet, and they crack, I forgot how many dozens of eggs in there, and make a huge omelet for Easter. So yeah, we have a lot of interesting traditions. They fly kites in Bermuda. They read detective novels in Norway. In Sweden and Finland, they get their old clothes off, and they say they dress up as witches, but they look a little more like urchins to me, and they carry around copper pots and collect candy. In Poland, you may get doused with water on Monday. In Greece, they throw pots off the balconies and shatter them in the streets on Saturday. So that was what they were doing yesterday. In Italy, there's fireworks. And in the Czech Republic, they make these little willow wands and wrap ribbons on them and then tap women to share fertility. Rabbits, fertility, resurrection. Not sure how it all goes together, but you can make a link. So you can probably tell that a lot of different springtime motifs have mashed up with our religious symbology over the centuries. But the common feature in all of that, the reason we've kind of let that happen, is that they all represent making things new. I'm getting caught in my top. I'm going to take this off. There. All things new. All things are now possible, right? We've had a rebirth, out with the old, in with the new. All these things that we also relate to spring. But now let's get back to the idea of the parable of the resurrection. From a science of mind perspective, Easter is not primarily about a historical event. What it's really about, as are all parables, is a spiritual principle. That's what we're always teaching in a parable. It represents that the resurrection is actually a living, present-day experience, right? It's a rising of consciousness and a letting go of limitation, fear, doubt, moving into your new life and new awareness and new possibility. With this final sequence of events, Jesus demonstrated love over fear, right? Father, forgive them. Life over death. He was not in the tomb. Spirit over circumstance. He had been nailed, spirit, entombed, and he goes out and walks among people again. Consciousness over condition. That was his awareness of the divine design that he came in with. So Easter then becomes the ultimate demonstration that life is eternal, good cannot be buried, and spirit will always rise. And Ernest Holmes said these things. Jesus proved that life is continuous, that good cannot be destroyed, and that spirit triumphs over all. Now, for me, the real turning point in the whole story is the morning when Mary and other women arrive and find the stone rolled away from the tomb and no body inside. Joseph of Arimathea had gone to Pilate on Friday evening and said, "May I have the body?" And Pilate, who was actually kind of surprised to hear that Jesus was already dead, let him have that. He took him, they wrapped him in the linens and took him to Joseph's unused tomb and put him inside and rolled a big stone over the front. Now, some of the coverage says that there were guards sent on Saturday, and that both women watched and guards were set around because they were afraid that somebody was afraid that the followers would steal the body and play like it had come back to life. But then they all agree. On Sunday morning, the women appear and Jesus is gone. And one or two messengers from God wearing white, maybe they were angels, inform them that Jesus is alive and they need to stop looking in the places of the dead to find him. Now, I chose to wear white today because I want to be a messenger to each and every one of you that you are very much alive this day. And that you are containers of divinity with all the powers pertinent thereto. The rolling away of the big stone is in every gospel. Sometimes there's more or less women, more or less messengers. Sometimes they are or aren't designed as angels, but one constant, big stone rolled away. So it's obviously a really important symbol in this parable. Just rising from the dead and walking among your disciples was not sufficient. There had to be a really big physical obstacle in the story to draw attention to it and make it memorable. So let's set the scene for this part of the parable and the principles that it details. The tomb. The tomb represents worldly appearances and old conditions. In the case of Jesus, a broken body, betrayal, rejection. In our own lives, it's the current state we are experiencing. Now, it does not have to look as dire and grim as the situation that Jesus was in, as well one described in our parable of resurrection. But now, aren't there many times when we feel closed off from our good, closed away from that thriving, fulfilling, beloved life that we yearn for? Maybe you had a life that you loved that you feel like you've lost. Or maybe there's a life others have told you you should have that you don't feel like you've achieved yet. Maybe it looks more like a rut than an actual tomb, just stuck in place, in a place that you don't really think is the best place for you to be. Our stone represents everything that is holding us back from that life we long for. It is the mental barriers that are blocking us from achieving our desires. Now, I have asked for one slide today, and this was also in your newsletter. I hunted through a lot of pictures for this slide. Many of the images that come up show things I didn't need in the picture, but they also, a lot of them show a light shining in from outside onto this empty stone platform. This one, and I believe this based on where the stone is showing the light coming from within the tomb out. For me, that speaks to the way we cover up our own lights. And that's what I'm talking about today, the way we cover our own light up. It speaks to the idea that we are these divine creations that Jesus understood himself to be, and we just need to stop rolling stones in front of ourselves and covering all that up. And it could also be the shining in from the outside if you just let your eyes see what you need to see, and there could be times when we need to see that too. Moments when we're having trouble finding our own light, understanding it. It's okay to look out there and realize there's still a light shining on me. What are the stones you've got in your life? Fear? That's a huge one. You know, Louise Hay wrote this book about healing your life, and there's big versions and there's small shorthand, almost like an index, and I used to look at all those all the time. And I don't anymore because you know what? They're all fear. I got to realize, and my knee hurts because of one kind of fear, and my head hurts, maybe it's a different kind of a fear, but basically every answer in there has to do with fear. Fear of loss, fear that there's not enough, fear that I'm not enough, fear of retribution in a world that is all filled up with guilt and shame. It's a huge category. Doubt, that's a stone. Discouragement. Old stories about who we think we are, what we think we deserve, how big a price we have to pay to earn our good. How many times in life do we put these stones right in front of our own possibilities? We say, it's too late for me. I'm not ready. Things never change. That's just the way I am. And yet, this final Easter parable that Jesus tells us says that no stone is too heavy for spirit. There is no stone too heavy. Now, even with this example of brokenness as powerful as the one in the Easter story, it's possible we still might see ourselves as too broken to repair our lives. And I want to share two visual images that come to me on that topic. And one, interestingly, just last night, I was watching a TV show and they made reference to kintsugi. And if you haven't heard of that, kintsugi is a Japanese art form of making beauty from brokenness. And if you were to look it up, you would see this just amazing works that are done. It's often associated with ceramic bowls that are broken and then they are repaired, and there's gold used in the repairing. And so these pieces are put back together with these beautiful gold veins in them. And not only are they beautiful, they're stronger than they were originally. And in this particular instance in this show, there was a church window that had been broken by violence. And they chose to replace that window with this kintsugi idea of pieces to represent that beauty comes even out of the violence. And then here's another little story. You've probably heard this in some form or fashion, so I'm just going to touch on it quickly. But there's a woman who has to get water from the well behind her house. And every morning she goes out with her 2 pots hanging from the end of the stick. And one of the pots is whole and perfect and complete, and one of the pots has a few cracks and it leaks a little bit. So each day, by the time she gets back to her house, the cracked pot has leaked half of its water out. The perfect pot was very proud and bragging on the fact that it could deliver every drop. And the cracked pot felt ashamed. So one morning, apparently pots can speak, and we just didn't know this. One morning, the cracked pot speaks and says, "I'm really sorry. I have never been able to do what I was designed to do. I leak. I'm broken. I can only get half the water home. I failed you." And the woman looks at the pot and she smiles gently and says, "Have you noticed the flowers on your side of the path?" The pot had never really looked. She said, "Tomorrow, when we walk, look." And so as they return to the house the next morning, the little pot notices that on his side is this beautiful garden. There are flowers of every color blooming out there, yellow and red and blue, and just glorious. And when they reached the house, the pot said, "Yes, but I still leaked half the water." And the woman said, "I planted those flowers along your side of the path. Every day, without knowing it, you watered them because your cracks caused beauty to grow." So my point in both images is that what you consider broken might be the thing that is needed to bring more beauty into the world. So if the stone represents all these limiting thoughts, then rolling away the stone represents limiting beliefs being removed, right? Fear being lifted and old thinking dissolving. The final piece of this story is the resurrection, the getting up and exiting the tomb and going on about life. And that represents new awareness. Science of mind teaches us that consciousness changes cause life changes, right? Change your thinking, change your life. So Easter becomes a time to celebrate that we have this new self. And we can celebrate that every day. Ernest Holmes wrote, "The resurrection takes place in us as we rise to a new level of consciousness." So as we go from fear to faith, as we move from limitation to possibility, from separation to unity, from doubt to knowing, we are shifting, and it can happen every day. This isn't the only one. This is just the reminder day, right? So from this perspective, all is available to us. We can overcome anything if we recognize who we are in the same way that Jesus recognized who he was. Now, next week, I am going to talk in depth on the creative process. It's in our teaching symbols here. It fits really well into the whole spring idea. And there's going to be a lot of how-to about this changing consciousness. So be here for that. And just to recap then, the resurrection story, it tells us what appears to be an ending is often just the beginning of something greater, right? We remember this guy who may have died in April 3rd, 33, because of what happened after that. The stone rolls away and the light returns, or in my way of thinking, shines forth, and life rises again. And maybe this Easter we're being invited to see our own lives differently. Look at them differently. Maybe you've walked through a difficult season and learned to water with compassion. Maybe you've had a loss that deepened your wisdom. Maybe you've been challenged in a way that's opened your heart. Because Easter is a reminder that nothing in us that's real can ever be buried. Nothing in us that's real can ever be buried. Love always rises. Hope always rises. Life always rises. And the places where the most beauty is revealed are sometimes the places that we thought were broken. So Easter asks, what stone are you ready to roll away in your life? And what will you do with your new resurrection consciousness? Thank you.
Thank you for spending this time with us on Spiritual Wisdom Weekly from the Greater Orlando Center for Spiritual Living. If this episode supported you in any way, we invite you to stay connected. Listen again, share it with someone you care about, or simply carry what resonated with you into your week. Until next time, take good care and keep growing in spirit.